Hey everyone, hope you're all doing good. I'm back again with another walkthrough video, only this time around things are going to be just a little bit different. This track is currently unreleased, and I thought it would be cool to give a bit of insight into the song before it comes out officially. So this is a new single called For a Heart That Has Felt Too Much, and I think it's going to be a one-off project in terms of style. It's not quite different to what I usually make, and not really a direction that I want to pursue in the future, but it was fun to make nonetheless. So I've made three versions of this song. We have the main version, which has this pitched up vocal lead, which is the one that we're going to be looking over today. This vocal lead, in terms of kind of style, is not really going to be to everyone's taste. So I've also included a second version of this song, which has the original vocal pitch, and a third instrumental version just to kind of cover all bases. So the walkthrough will be the same sort of format as before, where we just cover each element one by one and build the track up gradually. I'll try to keep most of it in a relatively layman's format, but there's definitely some production lingo that might sound a little bit confusing. But whatever side of the fence that you're on, I think you'll find it insightful if this is the sort of thing that does interest you. I'm going to be focusing on some more production related videos in the future that are more technical in nature, whilst keeping these track walkthrough videos in a slightly more accessible format. So without further ado, I'm going to do a quick playthrough of the track and then start deconstructing the elements afterwards one by one.
You've been on my mind to keep. Happens every now and then. I just don't need more than me. I think it might be enough for me.
Alright, let's get started with the first element here, which is the piano. It's just top of the playlist arrangement window here, so that's what we'll start with. Before we actually go into the software use, I'm just going to give you a look at the chord progression, which is extremely simple. And as you can see, it's copy and pasted pretty much the whole way across the breadth of the track. We're working really with fifth chords here. We have a sort of chord progression that's composed of the root notes on a double octave here. You can see all of these are the exact same notes, just an octave above one another. And then the fifth note on top. So it's really just a simple chord progression, nothing fancy at all. The only variation really in this is the middle breakdown section here, where we have some top melody and one change in chord, and the piano outro, which is a little bit more menacing in contrast to the rest of the piece. So let me just play you a couple of bars through. So yeah, extremely simple. In terms of software, I use this little bit of kit from, I think it's pronounced Imagero, which is an artist who I follow and enjoy. Here's his website down here. Out of all the piano libraries I've used over the years, I have to say this is probably my favorite, despite its low price point. It's only $20 on his website. It has a really simple GUI, just the 5 parameters here, the different sliders. But it's a really kind of warm and intimate sounding piano, which is great for ambient and cinematic music, obviously. One of the main features here is the hammer volume, so I'm going to turn that off and let you hear what it's like without it. Then back on. And you get that hammer volume, which just adds a sense of realism to the sound. You have some other basic parameters like output volume, release time, velocity, sensitivity, but there is this pitch shift parameter, which is sort of more like changing the kind of EQ and resonance of the sound as opposed to transposing the actual pitch. I'll let you just hear what that's like. So definitely a cool little plugin if you're interested in this sort of thing. If we go to the mixer, you can see that there is a bit of processing going on for these piano parts. On the main insert, we have a list of things running here. Top of the list is a FabFilter Pro C. And I will try to not get too technical in this course, although I may veer into that territory quite a lot by accident. But basically this just kind of tames the overall volume of the sound. And squeezes the dynamic range together to keep the overall volume a little bit more cohesive. And this is really to do with the mix down of the track, which is not something that we want to really look at today. So compression across this song on the inserts is really just to do with the mix down and revolves around keeping the volume nice and controlled so nothing gets too loud or nothing remains too quiet. Next in the mix we have this reactor module. I think I've looked at this before in previous videos. This is a glitch module by Native Instruments, and essentially it uses MIDI to determine set points of glitching and other various kind of techniques like pitch shift and comb filters and so on and so forth, depending on what you choose. The MIDI that you input here determines what settings on this are activated. So I'm going to just give you an example of what I actually mean by that. So if I go in here, you'll see this MIDI out channel here, and I've got that ported to the Native Instruments module that we just looked at. And this is just input MIDI data. So every time these notes are triggered, it triggers the plugin in return based on whatever settings I've determined. So I'm going to turn it on. I'll play before and then I'll play an after. So we have this just dry piano. Now if I activate that, you'll see that every time those notes play, something's going to change here. And this was a kind of rhythmic chop that I wanted to use in conjunction with the drums. So it's really best heard in the context of the drums playing as well. I'm just going to quickly turn them on to let you hear what it's like. Next on the list here is another compressor. This is from Klanghelm, the MJUC. This kind of compressor is used after the glitch module because there's, I guess, peaks in volume created from this glitch module that needed to be tamed, that the first compressor won't affect because it's first in the chain and the glitch module follows after that. So I've just set this compressor following the glitch module to tame any peaks that it may have created in the process of the glitch. Underneath that we have a limiter for further, this is kind of hard limiting, so the signal, once it crosses a certain threshold, is just squashed completely. And then we have some sidechain limiter set up as well for later in the song. We also have this PT EQ, which is a Pultec emulation for free. That's really nice. Just adding a slight boost at 100 Hz in the low end, just to give the piano a little bit more warmth in the context of the mix. We have a reverb sound over here. So I've used a send here with a Valhalla delay. I've turned the reverb up full. This separates the dry and wet channel, so we have the two different signals. So we have the main dry piano here, and then you have the signal here, which is just the reverb signal because the mix is turned up fully wet so that there's no dry signal of the original insert coming through. And separating these two signals gives you more control at the mix down stage. You can kind of get more precise when, I guess, mixing the two together. So Valhalla delay, obviously, as the name entails, it is a delay plugin, but I like to turn this diffusion parameter up full to turn it into more of a reverb. This is a tape algorithm, so we have parameters here like wow and flutter, which are common parameters you'll probably have seen in different tape emulation software if you've ever used one. But I'll just actually turn the dry signal off so that you can hear the reverb soloed out. And also just turn the drums back off as well. Now it's mixed very quiet. We have this EQ underneath it as well to tame the high frequencies of this. I do usually tend to cut the frequency, the high-end frequency of most sounds down to around 1500 Hz because reverb can get become quite a dominant force in the mix overall. And of course we've cut out some low-end just to clear up any muddiness that may be present in the sound. We have the exact same glitching going on as we did on the piano dry signal using the same module again, linked to the same MIDI out, and that's just replicating the same rhythm that we looked at just a moment ago. Then underneath that we have a limiter which is squashing the signal once it crosses a certain threshold. Usually when it comes to limiting, you don't want to, people wouldn't typically set up as many as I have in this track, but because it's quite busy and limiting tends to squash the dynamics of a signal, that can result in like a little bit of distortion and kind of just a not very pleasant sound. But because this track is so busy, it's not something you hear, and I would argue that it was actually kind of necessary because there is so much going on, and it helped to really just keep the elements kind of cohesive, especially in terms of volume. So let's see what's next on the list. That's the piano covered. The next thing that we have here is a patch from, I think it's the Oliver Arnold's Composer Toolkit. This is one of the times where I haven't actually composed the synth myself. I think I've just used a pre-made patch. So let's open it up here. Yeah, so this is the Oliver Arnold's Composer Toolkit, as you can see, and this is called the Dark Angel preset. I'll just play it through for you. And this is the same chord progression as the piano. Of course, it's just adding atmosphere to the overall sound. You'll see that we've got quite a lot of atmosphere going on as we get further into this song. But yeah, it just served as a nice little top layer. It's above some of the other elements. It did have a lot of resonant bumps in frequency and volume, so I've got a compressor just to tame the sound a little bit, and then a limiter as well for that kind of ceiling threshold, and a bit of EQ to tame the particularly resonance frequencies. You've got to be really careful with these atmospheric sounds in the context of a mixdown, because the more you have, the more concern of a build-up you might have in your hands, and you just want to be mindful of any bumps or resonant frequencies that might be making the mixdown sound a little convoluted. So it's nothing particularly special, that sound. For further atmosphere, I've used this sample called Ward from my ambient and cinematic sample pack series. A lot of you watching this probably have access to these already if you're a member of Patreon or you bought one of the particular Indiegogo perks. Here's how it sounds. So making your own sample packs is handy because you have immediate access down the line to sounds that you particularly enjoy right off the bat, and you can just transpose the pitch to make them suit whatever project sound or project file that you're working in. So here's those two together. And then under that we have another Oliver Arnold's patch. It's from the toolkit again. It's just called Dreams. And the combination of these three layers, as you can hear, results in something really nice. There is some processing going on here with this particular sound though. Let me just play it on its own first. So what we've got here is another glitch module. The reactor glitch module. So this one is based more around different pitch adjustments and comb filters, as you can see here, and it's the same principle as before, where we just input MIDI data to it, run it through the same port number, and every time these notes are playbacked, the module is then activated and causes whatever glitch that you've determined in the settings. So here's how this alters the sound. And then without. And back in. Underneath that we have your standard compression just to tame any volume. We have a Valhalla delay here in, I guess, quote-unquote reverb mode because the diffusion parameter's full. I don't usually, or I don't as often put reverbs on the main insert. I usually like to separate the dry and wet signal. But because this atmospheric sound is already quite convoluted in nature, I felt like it was okay to just go ahead and place a reverb on the main insert. It's not up full, so it's still retaining half of the dry signal, and of course half of it is then reverberated. And it's just to kind of further the overall atmosphere. So there it is off. That glitch module did make the sound a little bit dry in places, which is why I've added this to kind of just compensate. We have another glitch module, which is doing the, I believe, same sort of glitches that the piano glitch was doing, that we looked at earlier. Again, a compressor and limiter, just to tame those two elements. And I'll just play it through for you, the piano and the atmosphere combined. The final bit of atmosphere was another sample from the my own ambient and cinematic sample pack series. I think this is from volume 2. In fact, actually, it might be from my noise sample pack. that I made. I'm not too sure, I can't quite remember. But this is just reversed and pitched to suit the context of this song. So here it is normally. And all I've done is reverse it and transpose it down a semitone. In fact, I'll just play it here. Next up, we'll take a look at the drums and percussion. So as you'll hear in the playthrough, the drum and percussion section tends to start out a little softer and gradually builds its way up to be a bit more up-tempo and upbeat through the use of the kind of, almost it's a drum and bass sort of rhythm and style of playing. But let's just break down each component of the drums, just like before, like we always do, starting with the kick drum. I do tend to often start with the kick drum when working on music in general that contains drums and percussion, just to kind of use it as a center and to ground every other part of the drums around it. So we have this big consolidated pattern here. We'll just open up and play. Pretty basic, sort of hitting on the downbeats and a few offbeats as well, but nothing complex by any stretch of the imagination. And no processing on this particular kick either. It was fine just straight out of the box. After that we have this rim shot added in. Just on the offbeat. We have a bit of a glitch going on with this one. This is the exact same pattern that we used up in the piano glitch, just to make it blend in with the rhythm of the other elements. We have this tonal perk here. I think that's from Battery 4, can't quite remember. I just sort of rendered it out. Panned it a little bit to the left to create more of a stereo field. I don't think I ended up using that particular perk that I've just turned on, so I'll turn it back off again. We have a wood block underneath that. So it's actually the same pitch as the rim shot offbeat sound that you can hear just before. And I've pitched it to make it so. Sounds like there's quite a bit of delay in that as well. So I've used Sound Toys Echo Boy here with a quarter note delay time, mix up to around halfway, and a bit of feedback. I'm using the Echoplex style algorithm, which is good for a kind of more gritty sound. And then that little tom synth to just punctuate things. We have some hats from Battery 4 as well. And again, another layer of hats. Let's just open that up. Some of the patches within Battery 4 are velocity sensitive, which can help in adding a sense of realism, which is why I like to use specific drum libraries from time to time instead of just relying exclusively on audio samples. And you also have much more control over the editing of the parameters. If we use the drop-down menu here, you can see you have a bunch of different sections. So it's actually quite elaborate in what you can achieve within Battery 4. And it can be used as a standalone sampler as well, if you want to drag your own samples into it. It doesn't by any means have to be drums or percussion. So we have that kind of bird noise, I suppose you would call it. Let me just solo it out here. just a bit of EQ to tame the high end. Again, a quarter note echo boy and some vintage verb to make it a bit more atmospheric. Because it's a one-off hit and doesn't play that often, I think it's fine to maybe go a bit further with the delay and reverb if you want to kind of help it blend in with the more atmospheric elements in the song. But you wouldn't really want to send, or for instance, say, put a delay and reverb on the likes of these hats because they're playing constantly. At least not a delay and reverb of this caliber. Again, just another perk. And then more battery. So this next sound is from Native Instruments West Africa. I think I just rendered the loop out because it was hogging too much CPU in my computer or memory. I can't really remember why exactly, but this is the loop that I came up with. Now you'll hear that the kick drum switches up here, and this is to make it more in line with the kind of drum and bass rhythm that's introduced at this point. So we have the kick 2 channel on this. We have a Pro C2, and I think this just compresses a little bit of the transient of the kick drum. This is all context dependent and boils down to your own preferences. I've just tamed a little bit of the transient, but a lot of the times people tend to prefer their kick drums to be as transient and kind of punchy as possible. I think I rendered out some ride cymbals as well from battery. And underneath that some hats. All three of these audio clips I believe did come from one of the battery 4 packs. I just had to render it out for the sake of, again, CPU and memory. So this is actually the chorus, but the sort of drum part that separates this from the verses is this loop, which I've consolidated into an audio clip here. So that just plays for 8 bars through the chorus. If we move on to the second half of the chorus, we have this consolidated pattern, which is actually just a kind of amalgam of all the different drums rendered out. And then we have a glitch module applied to it afterwards. So I'm going to just activate these two. Turn the tempo automation clip back on. I didn't actually render the kick out, so we had more control of it separately here. Let's just go to the mixer quickly. You can see I've got this linked up to a reverb sound here. So again, just using Valhalla delay in more of a kind of reverb mode because of the diffusion parameter up here. And we have a limiter underneath just to tame the reverb. Sometimes on drum tracks you may have to tame the reverb sounds because obviously drums are quite transient in nature and you want to keep them under control if your song's quite busy and just keep things a bit tidier. Same principle as before, we're using a kind of loop setup here with some MIDI input data so that every time the MIDI is triggered within this pattern, it then activates the glitch module up here. So for the first half of this, I actually have the reverb off and then it gradually comes up into this section, and at that point a filter freak also comes in. That's a Sound Toys plugin which I'll just open up to kind of weave in and out of different frequencies, as you'll hear in just a minute. And to give you an idea how that sounds before processing, I'm going to turn the reverb off and the glitch module and also the filter freak. So those three elements are adding quite a lot of character here. Now underneath them we have just a sub bass, which just plays the root notes of the chord progression. This is really simple and it's not really worth talking about. It's just serum and a simple sine wave, analog BD sine. So definitely nothing worth talking about. The only processing here was the Reactor 6 glitch module, which is linked to the same thing as the piano up here, just to keep the rhythm coherent. So I'm going to split this tutorial into two different parts. Obviously this is part one. We've looked up to the point of the bass. In part two, which I'll release in the next day or two, we're going to start looking at the synths. So we have the synth sections here using Native Instruments Monarch and Serum. We're also going to look at the strings, the vocals, and finally the effects down at the bottom here. So I hope you enjoyed part one, and I'll see you again in the next day or two for part two.